At this point, we want to take a look at how the EFCC and the NFIU are planning on collaborating to see how they can remove Nigeria from the FATF's grey list. Now, Nigeria's EFCC and NFIU are set to be talking or looking at ways to ensure that Nigeria exits the Financial Action Task Force grey list. Hafsat Bakari from NFIU stressed the importance of cooperation in addressing the FATF challenges during discussions with the EFCC Chairman, that is Ola Olukoyede. Strategies include intelligence sharing and enforcing compliance to combat corruption, terrorism, and insecurity. Nigeria, listed in February 2023, must fulfill a 19-item action plan by May 2025 to further avoid FATF sanctions. This morning, Oladipo Ajayi, head fixed income and FX, Chapel Hill Denham Securities, joins me to talk about this. It's nice having you around, Oladipo.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you very much for Lekan for having me.
That's nice. Now, the major reason Nigeria was grey listed by the FATF was due to the strategic deficiencies in anti-money laundering mechanism, terrorism financing, and proliferation of illicit financing regimes. What, in your opinion, are the enablers of this perceived weakness?
Well, I think for me, it's more like the system and the processes that we currently have in place. Of course, we have system, but the issue is that we don't have system that actually works. Because since my days in the banking industry, I understood that when you do a transaction worth of 10 million, such transaction is supposed to actually be reported to NFIU. And most time you see the bank report this, but what do we use those reports for is another thing entirely. And so much that we have a lot of data, but we are not actually interpreting those data very well. And that's one of the reasons why we found ourselves where we are currently. I think on the part of the country, the process, we need to actually recalibrate the process and the system we have in place to ensure that they are full implementation. And not only the implementation, but to ensure compliance with some of this system and processes that we have in place. And I think with this, in no time we'll actually get out of the list.
Okay, so quickly, what economic consequences does Nigeria face if it fails to exit the grey list by implementing the required action plan on or before 2025? Because the talk is about if they are not able to meet up with the 19-item action plan and it continues to stay within that grey list purview and the possibility of even being blacklisted, that it might result into dire consequences for the country. What are these consequences that you would want to talk about?
For me, I don't think we want to get to that level because it's not a palatable one. Because as we speak on the blacklist, we only have 3 countries. We also have Iran on the list, and imagine Nigeria joining those people on that list. So it simply means that we won't be seeing inflow of foreign investments in the country. We won't see investment into foreign direct investment, foreign portfolio investment in the country. Because of what use can you actually invest in a country that you cannot actually travel to, or a country that you cannot actually trust or rely on the process and the activity that is actually being carried on in such country. So it's not a place where we want to be, because sincerely speaking, and not a time like this where Nigeria is currently actually trying to actually lure foreign investors into the market to actually keep the currency stable. It's such a time like this, not a time that you want to now discourage inflow of investments in the country. So it's not a level where we actually want to find ourselves, because it's going to be bad for us economically. It's going to be bad for our currency. It's going to be bad in all ramifications. Also, you will also discourage some other countries from actually transacting with Nigeria, considering us being moved into that list. So it's not a place where we want to be, and that's one of the reasons why we've seen that huge marriage between NFIU and the EFCC, trying to actually ensure that we get out of the grey list. Of course, in the last month, we've seen a lot of countries actually exiting the grey list after after the huge compliance with what is expected. And on the part of Nigeria, there's huge cooperation with Financial Action Task Force to ensure that we are being removed from that list.
Okay, so let's be critical now. You've talked about the consequences, and we now see that Nigeria is expected to submit its action plan. Now, for a country that is serious about getting off the gray list, what do you think should be the embodiment of a robust action plan that can galvanize the push in exiting the gray list?
I think the first thing you need to identify is what is the problem and what are you expected to do? Money laundering, terrorist activities and the like, corruptions and things like that. So what we just need to do is first of all ensure that we have a good system in place, ensure that we have good implementations and ensure that we have good compliance levels in place to ensure that we work within what we actually want to do. And after we have done that, we can then actually now submit such plan to Financial Action Task Force to ensure that they actually can now work with us on that plan to the actualization of what we want to do. So for me, I think it's not something extraordinary that we cannot actually get done. It's just something that we need to be serious about, that we actually want to get this thing done and it will be done. So I don't think it's anything out of play because those figures are there, those data are there. And at the same time, when it comes to terrorism, I think we need to also buckle up because sometimes when you see the case of Binance, and it sounds very great, and a lot of people applauded the government for actually switching interactions to actually try and cover what was happening in that direction. But this is a country where we will take 10 steps forward and we'll take another 5 backward. But when you hear news that one of the accomplices actually escaped, he also called question that are we really serious to actually actualize what we are saying. So we need to be deliberate and we need to show that composure to actually tackle and ensure that we're out of the list. And I think it's something that we can do if we are really very serious about it.
Well, talking about the issue around dealing with terrorism, you said it is something that can be done if the political will is there. But then we see a Nigeria that has identified terrorist groups and their sponsors in the last few months. These sponsors actually pose a threat. But then in a recent report, the Intergovernmental Action Group Against Money Laundering noted that Nigeria has not explicitly criminalized the financing of foreign terrorist fighters. So is that not a major setback when it comes to tackling the issue of terrorism in the country? Now, Oladipo Ajayi, you are going to answer this question, but then we'll go on a short break. When we return, I'll take a reaction on it. On Business Edge, we've been looking at the renewed collaborative effort between the EFCC and NFIU in seeing how to come up with an action plan that would help the country get off the Financial Action Task Force's grey list that is set to pose dire consequences for the country financially, economically. And we have been talking to Oladipo Ajayi, head fixed income and FX, Chapel Hill, Denham Securities. So I just go back to him and continue from the point where, Oladipo, you said that the issue around dealing with terrorism and all the aspects that have been raised by the FATF can be done only if the will is there. But then I pointed it out to you that, of course, we know that Nigeria has identified terrorist groups and it has named sponsors in recent days. But then a recent report has come out to say that, hey, Nigeria has not criminalized the financing of foreign terrorist fighters, and it has not even proscribed the terrorist groups, though it's faceless or nameless, as some people might say. But then a lot of people feel the Nigerian government need to proscribe it, and that would help it come up with a particular kind of way to deal with the issue around terrorism in the country. So in the failure of the Nigerian government to have this done, is that a major setback to actually tackling the issue of terrorism in the country?
Yeah, thank you very much, Lekan. Like we said earlier, one of the things that actually gets us listed on the grey list was that it's not that we don't have a measure in place, but the measures were actually weak, and that's one of the reasons why we were listed on the green list. And part of the weakness that we talked about is just what you just mentioned. And if you see recently, NFIU came up with a list of individuals, and also they also mentioned that some broad change businesses that actually encourage or actually perpetrate terrorism financing, or one way or the other, abetted fund transfer around that line. And I think that's one side of it, by actually naming these people. But the next action is that what comes after? What do you want to do to them? How do you want to use them as a sample for other, for them to actually know that this area is no go area again? And I think that's one of the things that we also need to when I was talking earlier, I mentioned about the fact that you have a system in place, you have a process in place, and you implement and you ensure compliance. Because one of the ways to ensure compliance is to actually make people as an example of what you actually do to people that actually perpetrate such evil. And I think I agree to a great extent that we have not done extraordinarily well in that regard, and we need to actually up again, because like I mentioned, the consequences, they're actually much more than we can actually talk about, and it's not it won't be so good for a country that's trying to actually come out of a critical very challenging economic time, and only for us to just get ourselves enlisted in the blacklist. At the end of the goal would that be that we are losing investment and nobody's looking at Nigeria as an investment destination and things like that. So I actually agree with you that we need to take it a step further. Beyond naming perpetrators, we need to actually ensure that there are strict sanctions around people like this, and also make them know that the world is looking, and these are the punishments that watch. And when you do things like that, it means that people know that you are ready for business, and institutions like Financial Action Task Force will now actually get to actually work with you around the full implementation of some of those things. So I think I agree with you to a great extent.
Okay, so let's quickly look at what the Apex Bank has done recently. Now, the Central Bank of Nigeria issued guidelines for the country's Bureau d'Change operators to align BDC activities more closely with global anti-money laundering and combating terrorism standards. So is that, by a stretch, a potential way of initiating the delisting process?
Yeah, for me, I think it's a great one. But like I mentioned, we most time we normally have this process in place. And I think before now, this is not a new circular. Such circulars have been out in the past, but it's just about the implementation and ensure strict compliance with some of these things. So it's not about the fact that we have process or we are trying to put process in place. The main thing is that we are ensuring that there is strict compliance with some of these processes, and that is what the government needs to do currently. And I think we are now in a technology war. And it should be easier for the government to actually monitor some of these things while working directly with some of these bureau de change businesses. So that they actually reiterated it is a very good one. That we now actually enforce compliance is another thing that needs to be done. And if you remember, when the NFIU also mentions that they are out to actually ensure strict compliance with the reporting or what is required of people, and I think that's a great one, because another thing for you to actually want to require people to submit reports is another thing is to enforce that those reports are actually submitted, and that's very necessary.
Okay, Oladipo Ajayi, head of fixed income and FX, Chapel Hill, Denham Securities. It was nice talking to you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lekan, for having me.